the recording. And this webinar is specifically focusing on questioning for teaching and learning. And my new book, it's my 15th book about education, is has just been published. And I wanted to do something to celebrate it, but I thought instead of a book launch or something, I thought something that will be really helpful and practical for teachers. And the little guidebooks, for anyone who's not familiar, these are a series of books. I love them. Um, as you can see, I've got a range here. And I contacted the publishers. I said, I really like these books. Can I write one? And then we got talking, and it was questioning that we agreed upon. And as they're little guides, they're very practical. But there was a lot that I couldn't include. So I thought, oh, I can include it in this webinar. And then there are some things in here that I talk about and write about in more depth in the book. So, just to introduce myself, I'm Kate Jones, and I'm a history teacher. I've taught in the UK, I've taught internationally. I work part-time at evidence-based education, author, as I've mentioned, most important role, wife and mum. And there are my books. You might be familiar with them. And obviously, questioning features in the other books, especially when I've written about retrieval practice or feedback, because I do think questioning and feedback are two sides of the same teaching and learning coin. These are children's books, so relevant if you're a parent, but not for the teachers. So before we begin, I thought I'd just share what I believe are the firm foundations for effective questioning. I think every teacher knows this, but it's useful to have a reminder. And recently, I did some supply teaching for the first time. I've taught since 2009, and I've covered cover lessons within the schools I've worked at. And that's different because even though it's not your subject, you still know the students. This was a supply where I didn't know any of the students' names, wasn't familiar with the ins and outs of school life. And it was a reminder actually that behaviour is the bedrock for effective teaching and learning. When there are problems and challenges with the behaviour, it really disrupts teaching and learning, especially questioning. You're trying to ask questions, and if students aren't listening or they're shouting out, it makes it really difficult. So, behaviour is that absolute bedrock. The second point is that knowledge really is power. It's our superpower as teachers. And that's knowledge of the curriculum and the content that you teach. Knowledge that can enrich your explanations. It shows with your enthusiasm, and it's linked to all the questions that you're asking, and it enables you to answer the students' questions. But it's not just subject knowledge, it's also knowledge of the children in front of you, and perhaps if they have additional needs or English as an additional language, and knowledge of prior knowledge. So in my supply lesson, and I was teaching an English lesson, not and this was a lesson about a piece of text I wasn't that familiar with. It was a poetry lesson, and I'd asked a question, and the student said, "I don't know." And that can be quite a common problem with questioning, and there are ways to overcome that. But I didn't know actually. Does a student not know? Or are they just saying, I don't know? Whereas if I had been the classroom teacher, I would then know, oh, well, they do know this because I've covered it, I've checked for understanding. I could then give some hints and some prompts and reminders. So, knowledge of students' prior knowledge is really helpful. And then the third point is communication is key. Students can only answer questions correctly if they understand them in the first place. So, this means pre-teaching vocabulary. I recall asking my students a question. What year was conscription introduced in World War One? A lot of the students answered it incorrectly. And when I was chatting to students about this, one of the points was, yeah, I don't know the year because what's conscription again? And that was a key term that I had used before, but not thoroughly taught and checked for understanding. So communication is key. And I'm really glad that questioning has a higher profile now when it comes to professional development, because when I trained to teach 2009 and 10, questioning wasn't mentioned at all. I just would go into a classroom and ask questions, hands would go up, I'd select students, and I developed some bad habits for the early years of my teaching career. And there can be this mistake that, oh, this is just something teachers do because we ask questions every lesson, every day. We do it naturally and instinctively. And I do think there's truth in that. But considering how often we ask questions and how important the questions are and the responses, we've got to get this right. We can't leave it to chance. So there's lots of ways that we can improve with our questioning, and hopefully some of the techniques and tips I share today might be helpful for you in the classroom. Now, John Hattie, he's lovely, and I've had I've been very lucky to work with him collaboratively. He wrote the foreword for one of my books. He talks about know thy impact. And inspired by that, I wrote a chapter in the book called Know Thy Purpose. So before we can even look at impact, we have to think about the purpose. And there are different reasons for asking questions in the classroom. And some of them, not all of them, are listed here. And some of these reasons that will link together. So I might be asking a question to check for attention and participation, but I'm also checking for understanding. Perhaps I'm looking for evidence of learning with a retrieval practice question, but I also want to develop oracy skills. So there's lots of different reasons, and I will come back to this throughout the session because there are some techniques I am sharing that have a very specific purpose. And if you've ever seen me present or read any of my books, you know I love to quote Dylan William. He's Welsh, just like me, and I just think he's wonderful. And this point really stuck with me. Just because you've taught it, it doesn't mean they know it. The teacher might have covered it, but we can't assume they've understood it or they can remember it. We have to check to find out. And that is what Dylan William is arguing here is essential to good teaching, the stuff that teachers do day in, day out. And one of the ways to do that, and probably the main way, is through questioning. So a key theme throughout my book is if we as teachers want better responses, better answers from our students, our starting point should probably be to ask better questions. And I say this from a very reflective position because I used to review students' work and think, oh, why didn't they mention that? Or why haven't they added this example, this detail? Well, I didn't ask them to. That's why. They can't just guess what's in my head and what I want. I have to be explicitly clear. And the way that I do that is through the question design. So we're almost designing a question backwards by thinking, well, what is the evidence that I want from the student? What is the answer? What am I hoping to achieve? And then how can I shape my question to find that out? So this is an exit ticket that I no longer use. Okay, so just write down 3 things you found out this lesson. Now, I say I no longer use, possibly I would use it post 16 in the classroom, but I absolutely stopped using this with Key Stage 3 when one lesson looked at the exit ticket and someone wrote, I found out Miss Jones went to Greece on her holidays. Yes, I did. That's factually correct. Yeah, you've got your tick, but no, obviously not what I wanted on the exit ticket. And they don't always write things like that. They may write things that are linked to the learning intention, things that you've stressed and emphasized. But if they don't, it's because they were not specifically asked to. This is a wasted opportunity to ask questions and to target that core essential knowledge that is really linked to the learning intention. But these questions on the exit ticket at my end of my lesson, this is to check for understanding. It's obviously not retrieval practice because they're questions and things you found out this lesson. So Daniel Willingham wrote a brilliant book, Why Don't Students Like School? He's a cognitive scientist. He says, review every lesson plan in terms of what pupils think about. And he says this because what pupils think about, they will remember. And if you want them to think about something, then ask them a question about it. That's a great way. And again, the purpose is to get my students thinking. So with that in mind, my exit ticket has a clear question or 5 questions, whatever you want. It depends on the nature. If it's a question that allows quite a detailed response and explanation, it might just be one question. These are short answer questions. Lots of different ways you could do this digitally, paper, mini whiteboards. So I've got 5 questions linked to the lesson outcome to check for understanding, self-assessment with whole class feedback. I use that information. For example, any misconceptions, any mistakes, gaps in knowledge, I'll either tackle it then or tackle it at the next opportunity. But just because I've asked this today, it doesn't mean that they now know this. I have to ask these questions again at a later date, which is really actually good for teachers because what that means is we can recycle our questions. Questions that we asked to check for understanding, we can and should ask them again at a later date with no notes and from memory for retrieval. So that exit ticket I just showed you, it's now been recycled. Oh, and this distinction is known as performance versus learning, Robert and Elizabeth B. York, and it's recycled into an entrance ticket. And if a teacher say, well, Miss Jones, we've already answered these questions. Yes, but that was last week or last lesson. Can you still answer them? And can you answer them now from memory? If they can, great. You've got the evidence of retrieval, not just understanding. They've increased their retrieval strength, so that means it'll be easier for them to retrieve in the future. You can move on with the rest of the lesson. If they don't answer them correctly, then again, that's also useful because you can then do something with that information. Now, I've shown you an English example and the questions were identical. And the same would probably be in humanities and other subjects. But this is where the nuance comes in. We've got an exit ticket in maths. A toy costs 35p, you pay with 50p. How much change will you get? So we're looking at money, these questions are looking at addition, subtraction. It wouldn't make sense to recycle this exit ticket because they could just memorize that answer. And it doesn't show that they can still use those skills. So I recycle the exit ticket into an entrance ticket, but my questions are a variation of that, a different type of question. Often with maths, you don't see the same question again. You see questions that will test a specific skill over and over again, whereas the English and the history were more factual based. So that's where there's that difference. And I've written a lot about multiple choice. There's a little bit in the book, and I put in my book some new stuff about multiple choice. I'm a big fan of multiple choice, but they are problematic. There's pros and cons to multiple choice. Of course, there's the guesswork. There's lots of bad multiple choice questions out there. Students tend to just rush. There can be a real lack of challenge because students have the answer presented to them. So they are recognizing it. But despite those disadvantages, there are benefits of multiple choice. You can still make multiple choice questions challenging and make the students think hard. The way that you do that is you ensure that the other 2 options are plausible distractors, that they have a link to the question. So, what was the name of Juliet's cousin in Romeo and Juliet? So, we've got the answer, so it's Tybalt. But I'm not going to put Romeo. That would be too obvious. It's not that type of play. I'm not going to put Macbeth, someone who's completely not even in this play. I'm not going to have these random options or comedy options. Instead, I've got these minor characters, Benvolio, Mercutio, that sort of, I say minor in the similar sense of Tybalt. So that's what makes it the question more challenging. If it's retrieval, you could put I don't know yet, but we've got to be careful. Some people think this is a good technique, others don't. Some don't like using I don't know because you don't want your students to pick it every time and just go, I don't know, I don't know. So you might only include it with some questions. You might say you can use your I don't know once or twice. A student once said to me, why would I pick I don't know when I could just guess? I said, you could guess, and your guess could be informed by knowledge, or it could be random. But if you don't know and you identify that I don't know, then that's communicating to you and me where that gap is, so I can help you with that. If you use mini whiteboards, you could have A, B, C, or draw a big question mark if you don't know. So then when the show me boards are up, oh, a few question marks, that's absolutely fine. Let's talk about it. And it does show that it's low stakes, that this is not summative assessment and testing. And what you might find with multiple choice is some students finish very quickly, other students need a little bit more time. And that was exactly a problem that I was experiencing. This is in a year 5, 6 history lesson. And as you can see here, this was a paper quiz. What year did World War II begin? They've highlighted what they think is the right answer. At the end, I go through the answers, tick and cross. But if they finish their multiple choice quiz, there's a second column for optional elaboration. Here you could say, what else do you know? What other information, relevant information? Tell me why the other two options are incorrect. Show me your workings out. If you selected true, tell me why you think this. Have we got something in the a Q? If that's okay, I'm going to do the Q&A. Yes, the no opt out. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I'll come to the Q&A if anyone wants to drop it in there, but I'll come to that just at the end. So then this builds in opportunities for elaboration and really to stretch and challenge. So this is interesting as well. And I recall reading research by Andrew C. Butler in 2019 that warned against the use of all of the above in multiple choice quizzes. I thought, I use this all the time. And that's what I find that evidence can do. Evidence can sometimes confirm. And instead of saying, oh, yeah, I already knew that, we should think, oh, that's reassuring. Great. I'll keep doing that. It can inform, say, oh, I didn't know that about how memory works and so on. Or it can challenge our thinking, our current practice. And when I read what Andrew Butler had written, I thought, okay, there's a few points he made that stuck with me. So first of all, there's a few issues with all of the above, but here with this science question, students think all of the above is a gotcha. It's there to catch you out, trick you. But we don't want our students thinking that. That's not why we ask questions to go, ha. Like, but also here, which of the following is a metal? The answer is all of the above. If the student selects iron, what feedback should I give to that student? Should I say correct? But I don't want them to think that the other two were incorrect options. Or should I say, no, that's not right, because that's the answer I'm looking for. But it's not actually factually wrong. And imagine how frustrated you would be as a student if you knew iron was a metal, you answered yes, it was, and then you were told that's wrong. You think, oh, that's so not fair. So it's really tricky. I don't know how you would even do this on a digital quiz that would give the feedback. So if it's got the potential to cause confusion, either avoid it or just use it with older students, but discuss it. And the same with none of the above. Which battle took place 1066? The student picks none of the above. Great, they've got the point. And then I say to the student, well done. Do you know which battle did take place that year? Nope. But I've still got my point, and that's not what you asked me. Oh, right, okay. So you don't know what battle took place. You've got the point. I've exposed you to just incorrect options anyway. What we could do is if you've got which battle took place, if you have none of the above, write the correct answer next to it. Or your follow-up question should be which battle took place, be more to give them the opportunity to select the answer. So again, it's just be careful. And I thought I'd talk about generative AI. It's a really hot topic at the moment. The Department for Education released a document about the use of AI. Their main point that I took away from it, obviously, it was saying be mindful, be careful, and so on. But they did mention about teachers using it to support their workload. And we do have a recruitment retention crisis with teaching, and workload is so tough that I think if we have tools that can support teacher workload, we absolutely have to embrace them. But there are other benefits of using AI with teaching and learning, specifically with questions. It could be consistency across a department. It can generate questions really quickly, quicker than we could. And also, it can record, it can track, it can adapt questions. You could even have, give me a feedback sheet for the students to self-assess. What people often talk about with AI, because they're aware of the errors, mistakes, and the quality that can vary, they talk about the human in the room. And I say this is the teacher eye. We absolutely cannot create anything and just say print or use it. We have to really check it thoroughly and carefully. And this is a response from AI saying AI can enhance teaching, but it should not, it should complement, not replace teacher expertise, ethical use, data privacy, bias, and so on. And this is from ChatGPT. So it's just a reminder, we're in a tough spot, aren't we, at the moment with AI? Well, like, it absolutely does bring problems and challenges for us in education, but it also can provide solutions and support. So looking at generative AI, so this is your ChatGPT, your Gemini, your Copilot, and how we could use this for question design. Well, something that I created actually quite a few years ago now, and it would be so much easier with AI. Originally, when I led this, I was head of history. We didn't have AI, but we did have a lot of resources we could use. And as head of history, of a small department, three teachers, myself included, I realised we were all teaching the same curriculum, all mixed ability classes, but our teaching had gone, I think it's fair to say, rogue. And uh, there needed to be a little bit more consistency across the classes and the year groups, but I still wanted to respect my colleagues, their professional autonomy, and their teaching style. So this is where the question banks came from for each unit topic per year group. So you click in year seven, term one for this topic. Here is a bank of questions that everyone in year seven needs to be able to answer at the end of the term. So how and when you ask them will obviously depend on you. This colleague might use digital quizzes. This colleague uses mini whiteboards more. And this teacher might need to ask these questions again, whereas these teachers may need to focus on this one. But we've got this secure question bank. And how we created it was I didn't know. As head of department, I always often had these questions. Do I make them all? Because I don't want to give work to the people in my team and seem that I'm just dumping and delegating. But then does that make me look controlling and like I'm excluding them from their own teaching? So I just asked them, like, what do you think is the best option? And they said, well, yeah, we'd quite like to be involved, but we don't want to do it all. Why don't we just divide it up? We did. We started with Key Stage 3. Each took a year group, 7, 8, and 9. We had a soft deadline when the questions will be done by. Brought them to a department meeting. We all looked at each other's. We might have said, oh, you've missed this, you've missed that. There we go. But now you could, if you haven't got a question bank, ask AI to create one. You could give it information about your unit, your specification, your content, the age group, and you could say, write me a bank of questions. It could just be 10 questions or 10 multiple choice, 20, 25, or it could be a lot more thorough. You could even break it down into subtopics. So then you have got that consistency, the quality assurance. And if you are using generative AI, that really can be very helpful in terms of teacher workload because you have input the instruction, you've checked the questions afterwards. So you've got these banks of questions for your classes that were made quite quickly. And also then you can copy and paste the questions into PowerPoints, into online quizzes, onto paper sheets. There's lots of variation. These also could be really helpful for early careers teachers. And also, I'm sure a lot of people here, I've been a non-subject specialist before. So I'm a history teacher. I've taught politics at A level. I've taught geography, drama, Welsh, RE. I was actually head of RE. So I'm very used to teaching outside of my subject. I'm happy to do that. I do enjoy that, but I do sometimes lack confidence. Whereas if I had these question banks as a non-specialist, or if I'd moved schools, or as a supply teacher, it would be really good. And the question banks can also be shared with your students and parents. So you can, once you've taught all the content, you can give it to the students for pair quizzing in class, self-quizzing at home. The students might want to make flashcards. Oh, well, here you go. These questions will help you. If you want to revise at home with retrieval practice, here are all your questions. This is everything you need to know. Email them to the parents if you'd like to help your child, but perhaps they're thinking, I don't know anything about this topic. I don't know how I can help or give feedback. So here's the questions, here's the answers. So really good. And if you haven't signed up to Teacher Prompts, absolutely do it. It's amazing. I was just reading the email from Neil Almond today. It's so good. So what Neil Almond does is he shares resources and research and tips about prompting, about AI, and uh, I think it's very balanced. If there's a story about negative or critical, he will share that too, but he will also share the great things. So I'm a huge fan. And Neil Almond does say as well that the hard and fast rule when it comes to prompting, so this is your chat, your conversation with the generative AI, is the more detailed the prompt, the better the output. So if we ask, can you create 10 questions on the Tudors? Obviously, I don't think you would do that, but they're probably going to not be great or not relevant. But the more you give it, and also again, that's why you've got to say a bit more information. So I've called these powerful prompts. So your starting point could be to tell AI, and you'll say, you are an expert in this. So you are an expert in this subject. And, once you've done this, you don't need to keep repeating it. What it keeps, unless you delete, it keeps your previous conversations. So once it knows you're a history teacher in Wales, then okay, it remembers that. But each time you might want to say, oh, well, it's, or if you're a primary teacher and you teach the same year group, you don't need to keep updating. Secondary, you will. But this is the example. This is post 16, the age range, the year group, the course, if you've got the exam board. You could even say where they are in their learning. This is brand new. They're at the beginning of a topic, at the end of a unit. They've just read this chapter. So you can be very specific. And what is it? The learning focus. So, you could share learning intention, your curriculum, your outcomes, your resources. You could upload a PowerPoint that you're using in the lesson. The more you give it, the better the response will be. And the tone as well. Is this low stakes retrieval? Is it to develop discussion and oracy skills? Um, have you got some exemplars? Have you got AI could do model answers, or it could say, here's an 8-mark question. Here's an 8-mark answer. Here's a 6-mark answer. Here's a 4. Lots of things. Do you want it to provide feedback? So loads of things it can do. So what we obviously don't want are these things. Create some questions on differentiation, or create some questions that are differentiated. Make this harder, make this easier. Write a worksheet. I don't think anyone here would do that, but you get the gist. If you give it a basic instruction, you will get a basic resource. And it's not just question banks. I've talked about misconception banks, about having a list of common misconceptions. Again, helpful for the teacher, for the students. If you used work examples, you could ask it to generate and have a bank of them, perhaps more than you need, because if you have a class you find are really struggling and they would benefit from more worked examples, oh, well, I've got a bank that I can refer to. It could even be a bank of feedback comments. If you have typical responses that you give, it could have these comments that then you apply, you copy or paste, and so on. But I suppose it goes without saying, we have to be transparent with our students about the use of AI. So if they are getting feedback, for example, from AI, not you, or if Kahoot is giving the feedback, although the difference with Kahoot, I suppose, is that you have input the feedback, so it is from you in a way. AI, it could be from you if you've checked the answer sheet and the questions, but it could be generated and it's not from you. So the transparency with students is key. Okay. If we want better questions and better tasks from AI, just like Neil Almond said, we make better prompts. So other than AI, there are lots of other digital tools we can use for questioning inside or outside of the lesson. It obviously all depends I'm not going to talk too much about digital tools because I work with schools where every child has a Chromebook, and then I work with schools that have no devices, perhaps just the teacher projector. Also, if we're setting it as a homework, we have to make sure that students have access to quality Wi-Fi, a device, because, sometimes they don't, and we don't want them to be at a disadvantage. So, as I said, I won't talk about these digital question and quizzing tools, but I thought I'd just share some of my favourites. We've got Quizlet, Carousel Learning, Educate, Mentimeter. You do need devices in a lesson, and it is anonymous, so there's no stakes, but you get a class snapshot, and there's pros and cons to that. Carousel Learning you can use with mini whiteboards in a lesson. Great for homework. I do think, and you feel free to quote me on this, that this is the best online tool for retrieval practice out there. If you don't have devices, Plickers have been around. I used Plickers. I had no devices. I just had I did have an iPad and I could scan the paper clickers. So lots of great things, lots of great online tools out there. So this is an example of a free recall question. What do you remember about Romeo and Juliet? And again, it depends on where your class are at. Obviously, if it's Romeo and Juliet, this is probably more of a GCSE example. But what is it that they need to know and remember? Or are you happy for them to just write anything? So if there's something specific, then we have guided free recall, where we guide their question, we guide their thinking. Write down what you remember about the theme of conflict in the play Romeo and Juliet. So it's this, some students prefer this because when they're not all students, some students might just like to write whatever they want, but when the question is focused, they know where to begin. When it's just tell me anything you can remember, and it can almost stomp them. So we've talked about the question design, but we don't end there. We've then got the question delivery and the different ways to do that. And we know that hands up is still a very common classroom method for questioning. I think it's a very hard habit to kick. And I reflected on why I used when I say hard habit to kick, I'm not suggesting that you don't use hands up. I'm just arguing it shouldn't be your main questioning technique. It was for me for years. Every lesson I'd ask questions, one or two volunteers would put their hands up, probably the same people every lesson. And that suited me because there was always someone answering and there was no conflict and tension. I didn't feel guilty that I was putting anyone on the spot. And it suited the students. The ones who wanted to answer could, and the ones who didn't want to when asked to. But no, it's very problematic and it's not the best questioning method in the classroom. As I mentioned, we tend to hear from the same students every lesson. We should hear from every student, and every student should have the opportunity. They should feel comfortable. There should be a classroom culture. We don't want to squash those students' enthusiasm who like answering. We still want to include them, but it's not just about them. There are other people in the class. And when we get answers from two or three, that is very misleading for the teacher. That is not evidence of the whole class. You don't know for sure. You know what that person who put their hand up and answered, you know what they think, you know what they know. But this person over here who never answers, how do you know uh, what they understand, what they know or don't know? And actually, hands up, I thought, like I said, it was inclusive. That wasn't making anyone uncomfortable or on the spot. It's not. An inclusive classroom involves everyone. But that being said, there can be a time and a place for hands up. It's for the teacher to, use a variety of techniques, consider the purpose, and also, you make that judgment call as long as it's not the main questioning technique. So when is it a good idea to have hands up in the classroom? Well, obviously, if students want to ask a question, maybe there's something they don't understand, they need elaboration. If you say we have a no hands up classroom, well, that's not very good, is it? Dylan Williams says no hands up except to ask a question. So he's still encouraging students asking questions. But it might be that a student wants a bit of support, a bit of help, a bit of feedback. It could be to add something extra, which links to this point. Perhaps you've asked a few questions and you selected the students, but then you might want to, does anyone want to add anything else? Is there anything else we know? And then that could be the opportunity where you do hear from your volunteers, but you've involved, or perhaps you've done your mini whiteboards, everyone's answered. And you then say, does anyone else want to elaborate on this answer? Or does anyone else want to tell me more? And they've still got that chance to do so. It could also be part of your behaviour management strategy. So if students are talking over each other, shouting out, obviously that is not a good learning environment. So you may want to start with hands up, although it's probably not the best point, but it would be better than, this random shouting and chaos. So cold calling's well known. It's a teach like a champion strategy from Doug Lemov. There's lots about this online. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about cold calling. Probably in the UK, when we hear cold calling, we think, oh, someone's ringing us we don't want. It's probably not the best name in all fairness. Because even Doug Lemov says cold calling should be warm. Cold calling is the teacher selecting the student that responds. You could still have hands up, but just because your hands up, it doesn't mean the teacher's going to select you. Your hands up just shows you think you know and you would like to answer. The teacher may select you, teacher could select someone else. So just a few tips that I've thought about for cold calling. And again, this links in with behavior is a bedrock, knowledge of your students, communication is key. Use student names. When I was doing supply teaching recently and I didn't know students' names, it was so tough. I kept asking, but when you know a student's name, it's more personal and friendly. And when you use their name is important. So, we don't say Alice and then the question. What we do is we ask the question, we have the wait time, then we use the student's name. Because if I use the name first, everyone's switched off because that person's been picked. This is direct advice from Doug Lamov, so that I'm just sharing. I saw it in one of his videos. He says it's not a gotcha, it's not a catch someone out, it's not they're looking out the window. Hey, what was the answer to that question? It's not that. It is about, focusing on the positive and having a classroom culture where everyone is valued. And this is important for students to know. They might think, oh well, I've been asked, so I can put my feet up and switch off. Miss won't ask me again. She's got all these other people to ask. No, I might ask you. Be ready, be listening, be prepared. And it did take me a long time to become confident with cold calling in my classroom. And there were several ways that I built up my confidence and my skills with this questioning technique. And one was to get feedback from colleagues, observing other teachers. Now, it can be quite tricky. In your day-to-day, your busy life as a teacher, you've got one PPA and you've got a million things to do. Oh, I'd love to go and watch another teacher teach, but I've got to do this. Yeah, I do understand the challenges. So I've shared a video with you, and there are loads of videos on YouTube of cold calling. Some of them Doug Lamov narrates and talks about. That's fantastic. For me, who didn't always have the time, I loved watching these videos, watching other teachers, just taking nuggets away that I could implement. Really good for elaboration, oracy. There's a lot of talk about oracy in the classroom. And explain to students what cold calling is and what it isn't. I recently interviewed Year 7 students as a student voice panel discussion, and it was all about teaching and learning. And I asked, do you teachers select students to answer questions with hands up or with hands up, but they still pick? And why do you think they do that? And a Year 7 had said, I think they pick the ones they don't like. It's like, no, you are wrong, and I will tell you why. It's not about that. If anything, it's showing your teacher likes you and she wants to hear from you. Because they said, oh, this teacher, she's always using this questioning technique. I said, great, because she's trying to hear from as many different students in her class as she possibly can. So it's important to talk to students about why we do the things that we do, or if we change. So, like for example, when I made the switch really to cold calling, I didn't take the time to explain to my students, and some of them, let's say year 10, thought, Miss, you've taught us for years and you've always said hands up. What's this change all about? They should be involved in that conversation. Okay, then. So I'm getting through this. There's a lot of ideas. One of the things I do here, when we talk about questioning, is what about the students who lack the confidence, who struggle to answer questions verbally or in front of their peers or in classroom discussions? Is there anything I can do? And that is challenging. When we want our students to feel very comfortable in the classroom and to feel confident asking questions. Oh, sorry, and well, asking and answering. And we don't want them to feel humiliated or embarrassed if they get it wrong. So, coming back to the purpose, these questioning techniques are not necessarily techniques that I would advise you to use every lesson, but I would consider them to be good if your purpose is to build confidence. So the first one I thought I would use is I combined cold calling with think, pair, share and mini whiteboards. So all three of these techniques combined. The students had the individual think time and they wrote down their initial response because I don't want them to forget this. I want them to have some sort of record they can refer to. Then they have the partner discussion. And at this point, they either get confirmation about their answer, or they might think, "Oh yeah, I think your answer's now correct, and I'm going to adapt mine." And then by the time we come to the share stage, you could use the mini whiteboards, or you could cold call. And I felt more comfortable cold calling here because students had had time to think about it independently, talk to a partner, prepare and rehearse a response. And they knew the share element was coming. They knew that cold calling would be next. So you can combine it with exit tickets. ABC is add, build, challenge. So is there anything you'd like to, select a student. Can you add anything to that answer? Can you build on that previous answer? Do you want to challenge or confirm and tell me why? Give students the green light. So this is something that I've done in the classroom. I have found it to be powerful, especially in think, pair, share, for example, or when students are working independently. I will circulate the class. If I know I have a student who is struggling with confidence, I talk to them about their answer. If their answer is correct, I tell them that very explicitly. I will offer praise, say that is a correct answer. That means I've given them the green light. So when after I've circulated, I then ask questions to the class. I select that student I've already spoken to, and I phrase it in a way, can you share your answer that you shared with me? Can you now share that with the rest of the class? Well, they know that that answer was a good answer, that it was accurate. So that's built their confidence to share with their peers. I saw this in a primary art lesson. I just thought it was brilliant. Her name is Ruth. And she said, what's your best answer? And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I asked her about that later because it's probably not a technique you want to use a lot because then students are obviously going to pick the one they're most confident with. We need to know what they don't know as well. But she told me that she specifically asked this boy that question because initially he would not respond. He would not talk, he would shrug. And she'd asked him this, what's your best answer? And he just was a bit surprised. And he selected the answer that he wanted to talk about. And he did. And he really elaborated on it. And it was great to hear him. And she was, you know, the goal is it's like scaffolding. No scaffolding should be permanent. Who wants scaffolding outside their house forever? No, you put up with it because it's temporary. And it's important that students understand scaffolding. And you could say to them, you've already used scaffolding examples in your life. Remember when you learned to swim with armbands? Do you still use them now? No. Or when you were learning to ride a bike and you had stabilizers. Now, I'm a great example of someone whose scaffolding has become permanent because I use Google Maps for places that I've been to many times. I've become over-reliant on it. I should know the way. Why don't I know the way? Why am I still using Google Maps? So scaffolding is temporary. And this is a form of questioning scaffolding. It has a purpose, and as that student develops their confidence, becomes more used to speaking in class, then the teacher then can target with specific questions, not what's your best answer. Also, wait time. Wait time is really important. And a few questions for you to think about. How much wait time do you provide? It's tricky to answer because, like most things, it depends. It depends on students' prior knowledge. It depends on the complexity of the question, perhaps the subject. But I've sometimes asked teachers, how much wait time do you provide? And they said, oh, I think about 10 seconds. I said, okay, but how do you know? So, well, I don't know, but it feels like that. And when I became aware of wait time, I became aware that I wasn't providing enough wait time. And I've got the research cited there. And the research, according to it, says the average wait time with questioning is less than 1 second. And I was observing a lesson, and the teacher did laugh, and she said I could share this. Obviously, it's like anonymous, but she said, you've got 30 seconds. And I started counting, and I got to just over 3 seconds. I said, right, stop. And we made this joke about a teacher 30 seconds. And that type of thing is quite common. So Mary Budrow, who's done a lot of the research about this, she said there's two types of wait time. You pose your question or a problem for students to solve, then you have the wait and think time, then you select the student to respond. There's another wait time where after the student's responded, you wait before you respond. So we're not cutting them off. So if there's anything else that they'd like to add or elaborate, they've got the opportunity to do so. So this is not research based now. This is my reflections. Why don't we just wait longer? If we know wait time is beneficial, and this is just what I think based on my experience, I think there can be sometimes a feeling of being uncomfortable with silence in the classroom. Yes, we want oracy and discussions, but we need to have silent classrooms at times, either for thinking, for focus, and for wait time. Also, this, I think we can overestimate how much time it might feel a bit longer to us. We can make, perhaps poor judgments or not recognizing and realizing the importance of wait time and how much it can help our students. We might have this protective urge to we see a student struggling, and we think, oh, and we step in and we prompt or we answer. We want productive struggle. Okay, maybe we can give prompts and scaffolding, but let them think first. Or we might just think, oh, I've got so much to get through. I've got to do the retrieval. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. But this is absolutely something worth making time for. And here it says here, student learning can increase in just 3 seconds. Adding a few more seconds. This is not about taking 20 minutes out of your lesson. We're talking seconds here. A little change that can make a big difference. So what are the solutions? What can we do about it? We can count, but if we want to be really reliable, I use a stopwatch on my phone. That's what I've been doing recently. I just go stop and I keep an eye on it. I don't have a countdown timer because I don't want that to distract the class. Sometimes count timers might be useful, especially if the class are doing an exact timed exam question or they have 20 minutes to keep them on track. But we don't want timers for things where it's going 3, 2, 1. It's panic, pressure. But I've got something holding me to account with my watch or my digital stopwatch. This is also important. Explain think time to students. We don't want them just, wasting this time and thinking about TikTok or daydreaming. This is their time to prepare, rehearse. The first lesson that I made a conscious effort to include wait time, a student said to me, Miss, are you okay? Because I was just stood there. So yes, tell the students why this is so valuable. And techniques help you use this, like cold calling, think, pair, share. You can just naturally build it in. This was something I used with my younger classes, where if they were struggling, they could phone a friend. And then you might have a hands up who'd like to be the phone a friend. Now, the phone a friend wouldn't give them the answer in my example. The phone a friend would give them a clue or a prompt or a hint. So that's why I asked for the hands up because they've got to think, okay, I know the answer and I've got to give them a hint. It's not always the right technique. What we don't want is them giving an inaccurate hint. So they go, oh, pick me, and they don't know. And then they give a hint that isn't helpful. But, again, you use your professional judgment. There's different ways that you could do this. I mean, students aren't really familiar with Who Wants to Be a Millionaire anymore, but we know the concept. You phone a friend, or maybe you have a discussion about it. Let's phone a friend. All right, I'm going to phone that person. And they could ask the questions. So they could say, okay, I think this is the answer. What do you think? Oh, I think that's the answer too. Okay, great. And now I'm a bit more confident because, and obviously, by the way, this is not actually using a phone. No phones in the classroom. Precise praise, another teach like a champion term. Basically, there can be a place, perhaps for generic praise with quick, well done, good job. But if we want something more concrete, that's where we got the precise praise. So with their answers, if we give precise praise, they know exactly what it is, like this MFL example here. They've used the past tense correctly. They've got something to be proud of, something they can keep doing well. Another little confidence builder. This is my precise praise postcard. So I just printed off a load of these, had them in my desk. You could have them digitally for emails. And I'd write the subject, write the name of the student. And then I would say exactly, it's not you've been great in history. It would be, Charlie has really improved, um, adding specific details to her conclusion to reach a judgment. And it's something that they could be proud of, they could take it home. And, it could be that was linked to a task, it could be linked to questioning and then sign it in the teacher, that type of thing. Low stakes can help build up the confidence. Mini whiteboards are naturally low stakes, things like that. But students with SEND can find retrieval practice possibly stressful. So just stress the low stakes nature if it's obviously that type of task. Ask questions one to one so that if they're not quite sure, then hopefully you have a nice relationship where they're not, it's just you that knows and you can give them reassurances, help close their knowledge gap so they haven't just answered incorrectly in front of their peers. But we get to the point where if that does happen, it's really not the end of the world. We all make mistakes. And this point as well, ask one question at a time. And I've put in brackets at the bottom. Well, that's obvious, Kate. Yes, but common sense doesn't always equate to common practice in the classroom. And even when I've done webinars like this and someone's, come on and said, oh, hi, that was great. I just wanted to know, what do you think about this and this and this? And then any tips for this? And if they've said it verbally, I say, sorry, what was your first question again? I can't remember. So, before we go on to that question, let them answer the first one first. Oh, I love this and can't take credit for it. It's year one, a school that I work with in Birmingham, and a year one spelling lesson where they wrote out the words in their books. The teacher then put the correct answer on the board, and they had their purple pens, and everyone put a tick or a cross, and then every student wrote the word out again. Obviously, if you got the answer correct, then the teacher is consolidating, saying you are now consolidating. If you wrote the answer and it was wrong, then this is what I see a lot. Students self-assess, they put a cross, but they don't have a record of what the right answer is. So they might keep making that mistake. But here, they now have, oh, that's how I should have spelt it. And also by asking everyone to write it out, you're not alienating just the students. Oh, if you got it wrong, write it out again. You're not shining a light on them and making them embarrassed. Everyone is writing it out again. And actually, that's probably a better use of their time than just sitting there waiting for the others to write it out. So lots of confidence builders there, uh, that you could use together. You could use as one-off. You could use regularly with the goal to not use them because they're a form of scaffolding. Okay, I'm aware of the time and I want to finish on time, so I'm going to rattle through this really quickly. There are potential problems with mini whiteboards, mainly linked to behaviour, not using them properly, but they are low stakes. They are accessible, you can easily wipe them off. It's not about you you can see every response in the class, which is probably one of the biggest things. You can give immediate feedback. You can use it for responsive, adaptive teaching. So whatever our problems are, there's probably a suggested solution. And that's the theme in my book. Potential problem, suggested solution. So just a few top tips. Oh, sorry, I think my face is blocking it. But establish and practice slick routines. Teach your students how to use mini whiteboards, when to use them, when not to use them, what are the rules. I was in a local primary in Solihull yesterday, sorry, recently. The way they were using mini whiteboards, actually, this was a reception class sat on the floor. And I couldn't believe the behavior and how they were using them so well because the teacher had taught them and explained and regularly reminded them. And we want the students, if you want them as show me boards, the answer should be short for you to see the whole class response. You can always ask the student to elaborate. Why did you pick that answer? Can you tell me more? You can use one, two, three, everyone show me at the same time, or row by row, just little things if you think copying is a problem. And again, this is a great reminder. It's low stakes. You're going to rub off the answer. I'm not taking photos of it. I'm not putting it on a spreadsheet. Just have a go. My colleague at Evidence-Based Education, Rob Coe, wrote a few years ago now about what we call poor proxies for learning. And this was specifically with lesson observations. Something you see in a lesson could be a good thing, but it doesn't give you evidence of learning. So I'll give you students, just because students are busy and on task, okay, looks great, but how do we know they're actually learning? They could be busy if they're colouring in or doing a word search, and they are not thinking and learning. And there was one point he made about questioning that, which I thought, oh, this is really interesting, that correct answers can be a poor proxy for learning. And you might be thinking, what? Well, just because they've answered a question correctly, yes, we can use that and learn from that. But it might not be the evidence that we think it is, basically. We might have to probe, dig a bit deeper, ask again, because the question could be too easy, lack challenge. It could be superficially memorized, copied. Maybe the answer was on the board, on the classroom display, in their books. It could be a random guess. So there's all these types of things that we just to be aware of. It's not to say that every answer we get from a student is, it's still valuable, but there's probably more questions to ask. So just to wrap up, some questions. What are the main questioning techniques that you use in the classroom and why? And how often do you reflect on your questioning techniques? And this one's linked to the first one. The questioning techniques you use, do they involve all of the learners in the classroom? Hands up doesn't. Hands up is one or two, three, four people. Mini whiteboards involves everyone. Cold calling means everyone has to be ready to answer. Think, pair, share means everyone is involved. A paper quiz, a digital quiz. So there's lots of ways that we can do that. And is there any type of questioning, or perhaps it could be the research, it could be a specific technique? Is there anything you'd like to learn more about? Well, before we go, I just want to share this discount code with you. I didn't come up with it, it's Jones 15. So you get 15% off. My book isn't available on Amazon yet, or you can pre-order it on Amazon and it'll come soon, but you can go directly to the Sage website. I will send a link in the Eventbrite, and here's the QR code. And when you get to the checkout, if you're interested, obviously no pressure to buy the book, but there is a lot more that I haven't included in this webinar. When you go to the checkout, type in Jones 15 and you will get your discount, and it will be sent to you immediately. Unlike Amazon, there's no delay. Sage have got copies. So yeah, I'll come back to that in a moment. But thank you very much. And if anyone's got any questions, feel free. Obviously, it's 5 o'clock. I'm going to turn the recording off for the questions to just make it no stakes. But thank you, everyone. Right.